You're listening to Why We Do What We Do. Welcome to Why We Do What We Do. I am your feeling it host, Abraham.
Yeah, and I am feeling tired host, Shane. But I'm maybe you're feeling tired too. Maybe we're all feeling tired. Maybe I'm feeling you're tired, host Shane.
That was really good. Everyone here is feeling a little tired because they're all feeling it from somebody anyway.
All feeling each other.
Yeah, we are a psychology podcast. We talk about all the things that people do, and we talk about the things that they feel, which is a thing that they do. And we also talk about all kinds of psychological things. And this is the second part in a probably two-part series, I'm thinking now.
Yeah.
On a very specific emotional construct called empathy.
Yeah, and it's so wonderful. And I apologize if my audio is bunk. I know Justin will do his best to make this work, but I am in a hotel room in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, which is surrounded by beautiful Appalachian things and nothing else, and a macaroni grill.
And importantly, this is not where Shane normally records.
No.
So
I am from the South.
Different. If you're joining us for the first time, then your introduction to the sound on here will be different from what you might hear on other episodes. And also, welcome. Happy to have you.
Yeah.
As I said, we like to talk about all these cool things. And if you like what you hear in this episode today, and I hope that you do, you can consider supporting us in a variety of ways. You can like and subscribe. You can tell a friend, leave a rating and a review. You can pick up some merch at our merch store. And hey, head over to Patreon where you'll get all kinds of bonus stuff and join our cool crew of people over there. And I will read your name at the end of this episode, which I will do when we get to the end of this episode for all those people who have already taken the leap to support us on Patreon. But I'd also like to wish you on this August 14th a happy color book day.
Yeah, that's so wholesome. I love it. It's International Rosé Day.
Oh, okay. It's National Creamsicle Day.
Excellent. I love that. It's National Financial Awareness Day. Something I didn't know I had was finances.
Now you're aware.
Now I know.
Raising awareness. It is National Navajo Code Talkers Day. That is a very fascinating topic. We should probably do a full episode on at some point.
Yes, please put that on the list because that is one of the coolest things in history that humans have ever done. It is National Tattoo Removal Day. So if you like laser shows, I guess that's a thing, substitute.
Laser shows on your body.
Yeah, the hood.
It is National Wiffle Ball Day.
Yeah, that's fun. It's Social Security Day.
Okay, some people really hate that. It is VJ Day. V as in Victor. Make sure I say that very clearly. VJ. I think that's video jockey, correct? Back when MTV was music.
Yeah, it started when Kurt Loder showed up, and they wanted to celebrate him and his birthday.
Fair. It's
also a World War II thing.
Oh, okay.
It's World Calligraphy Day.
It is World Lizard Day.
It's also Elvis Week. It's a really wild day for folks.
We
this
get a
week.
lot of holidays.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. It is Feeding Pets of the Homeless Week. So go do that thing. That'd be really nice.
Yeah, it is National Resurrect Romance Week. I mean, unless the person's name is Romance, then leave them alone.
You never know what's going to follow the word resurrect, and it elicits feelings,
Not these days,
It is National Smile Week.
Aw. It is Safe and Sound Week.
And U.S. Amateur Golf Week.
Hey, so that's us.
Yeah.
If we ever wanted to go golfing.
Yeah, we would definitely be. Amateur is the nicest way to put it.
Rookie.
I think they would see me holding a golf club and said, have you ever held one thing with two hands before? Because that's not how you do it.
And they would also hear all the profanity that both of us would spout and then think that we were just trying to be Happy Gilmore.
That's right. Rated R language people when trying to hold golf clubs.
Yeah. I mean, I would wear short day glow shorts and golf with you if we had the chance.
I would love to see you in some day glow shorts.
Prepare yourself. That's going to be the Why We Do What We Do summit.
Sweet. All right. Anyway, we are picking up, as I said, in a discussion about empathy. Last time when we discussed empathy, we really spent most of that episode digging in on the philosophical underpinnings of the definition of empathy, and then some aspects about measuring empathy, and I think just unpacking sort of what's going on in this arena. And I think suffice it to say that one of the things that we landed on more or less is that the definition is unagreed upon and a little vague, and more or less refers to very generally understanding how someone else is feeling, right? That's kind of the broadest of broad strokes definition of empathy that I could possibly give.
Yeah, that's as close as we got. I mean, that's pretty much as close as scientists have gotten to. So if it makes anybody feel better, like that's not just us making up that definition, that's literally everybody in the world.
There are many people who have made several attempts to sort of categorize and try and science up some measurements and bring some objectification to various degrees. They have been successful and also left, raised more questions to be answered, which in science is generally a good thing. I think there is an aspect that we also discussed where our history with another person, how well we know them, really does influence our ability to sort of be empathetic with them. And even in those situations, we still weren't like great. We got up to like 50% accuracy.
Right.
So
still a coin flip. Ish.
Yeah, still a little bit of a shot in the dark. So that's unpacking that part. I think getting to the next part of understanding empathy and what we'll talk about in this episode is a little bit the extremes here. So we'll be talking about the development of empathy as it relates to our overall evolution as beings, as well as where it can go awry in the extreme one way or the other, meaning a lot of empathy or way too little empathy. And yeah, so we'll dive into that stuff now.
Yeah, so let's talk about kind of how empathy develops. Now, most people tend to agree that empathy is a crucial developmental milestone that children learn as they pick up cultural language or languages, and it progresses along several somewhat distinguishable phases of complexity. So it's not just like you've got the skill and it stays like that. It kind of evolves as we get older and we learn more complex relationships and we have more complex language. It's really kind of interesting how much it shapes up over our lifetime.
It does, and it develops slowly. So like where we decide to call a phase having ended and another one started is going to be arbitrary and often imprecise. And I think that that's okay for broad strokes purposes, just understanding like it doesn't move in a clearly delineated stepwise fashion. It develops, right? That's the whole reason for the word development. Now, of course, the basis for the importance of this as a developmental milestone is rooted in an assumption that social behavior is important. We assume that matters, and that's why we care that empathy develops.
Sure.
And we've discussed this before, and we will again in the future. But yes, in case it wasn't clear, social behavior is critically important for our species, not for every species, but for humans.
Yeah.
And as people develop, the dynamic flexibility of language is such that we can then use that to cooperate. And we do so in these complex, interlocking social roles. And to do this, we must have meaningful ways of separating ourselves from those around us, just emotionally, cognitively, and understand the circumstances of us and the circumstances of others. If we behave as if our emotions reflect all of those of the people all around us, then we will have a misunderstanding of other people and their context. Mm-hmm. And it is not helpful for us in a cooperative way. So it's important that we are able to distinguish and appreciate that other people's circumstances are different from our own. And while that sounds so easy and basic, like why are we even talking about that? It is something that seems to be somewhat unique to humans, and it also shows up to varying degrees across languages and cultures.
Right. And I think it's not so easy to do when you realize that when a situation comes up and you have an emotional response, it's not always going to be kind of thinking about what it's like to be in that person's shoes, right? Like,
absolutely. Yeah.
And I think that's really important to remember is like we say it sounds easy, but then like in a situation, you might not be so quick to respond that way.
Yeah, good point.
Now, around 10 to 12 months, human infants will begin imitating the behaviors of others, including their emotional expressions. And given that expressions likely have no particularly special relation or meaning to infants, as evidenced by the fact that they seem to change at warp speed. If you've ever been around an infant, they are all over the place.
Yeah.
It is reasonable to assume, though, that many emotional mirroring responses in infants is simply imitation and not a particularly robust understanding of those around them.
Yeah. So they see crying, they cry. They see joy, they joy. They see smile, they smile. That doesn't necessarily mean that they are taking in anybody else's emotions, but they're starting to figure out how to coordinate themselves in relation to others around them. And they're kind of just imitating. We don't know. Maybe they are feeling those feelings. It seems highly unlikely. No psychologists seem to think that that's the case, but but it does seem like they are mostly just imitating. Now, that's not to say that imitation is not important. Actually, imitation is one of the most foundational and pivotal skills necessary for development and early learning. And even we'll use it a lot even later on for more complex learning. We're still imitating. We'll say, do it like this, and then we can imitate that, right? So the fact that it's imitation does not in any way devalue the quality of the fact that they're doing that thing, that they're just mirroring someone else's behavior.
Yeah, we should probably do an episode on imitation and how critically important imitation is for us as humans.
Yeah.
Like just thinking about observational learning and like how rapidly we learn because imitation exists in our repertoires. Man, what a powerful thing.
Make a very good point. I am compelled. I'm putting it on the list.
Yay! See, this episode is just going to end up with us having extra work. Isn't that every
right.
episode at this point in time? I think that's
it
science.
It kind of seems to be, yeah. It is. Yeah, good point.
Yeah, look at us go. Now, after a year and until around 18 months to 2 years, as language starts to develop, children will start to more accurately label emotions in others, but may not be able to understand how those emotions are unique to people other than themselves. So they may see that someone is sad and try to cheer up the other person by doing something that makes the child themselves feel better. So like they may do something to make somebody else feel better, doing what they know is comforting for them. Right?
Correct, yeah.
Like, for example, if a child sees their parent crying, the child might offer a blanket or a stuffed animal to their parent because that's what has comforted them in those moments. And so, like, that's kind of like their only frame at that stage.
Which is adorable and not particularly helpful. I mean, unless they were lacking a stuffed animal or blanket and that's what made them sad. But
yeah, or the stuffed animal was made of gold and it was a financial issue.
That would do it. That would. I would love that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, hand me a gold bear. I'm good.
Okay, so this implies that their language is this behavior of being able to respond to emotions, but doing so in a way that reflects a misunderstanding of the other person, implies that children's language does not really foster a distinct categorization of others and other circumstances. And so we can talk about this as like a distinction between you versus me. And so the other circumstances is you, and they have trouble distinguishing that from themselves and their circumstances, which is I or me, right? And just to say that another way, it's like I know enough to understand that you're sad, but not that what makes you sad is not the same as what makes me sad.
Mm-hmm.
Make sense?
Yeah. Basically, like, I understand this from my own experience. I cannot understand your experience. Or I don't understand your experience. That's essentially what it is. I understand the markings of it.
Yes.
But I don't understand what it is that has made you sad or what will make you feel better.
I have had the experience while sort of writing my thoughts out about this that I'm like, it feels like there are some people I have met where that is as far as their emotional empathetic development went, and they still are that way.
Yep. I have also, as we're reading this, I'm like, oh yes, I know that person.
Yeah.
So we did an episode on perspective taking a long time ago, and in it we outlined a basic framework for orienting to how language broadly facilitates an understanding of other people by distinguishing along dimensions called dyactic frames, which are essentially just I versus you, here versus there, now versus then, that kind of thing.
Right.
And so I think it's probably worth going back and listening to that a little bit and maybe getting some ideas on how we are approaching this.
Yeah, I think it was a good one.
Yeah.
All right, so let's go using the didactic frames and the example of the 18-month-old children that I was giving. As I said, they seem to lack this I versus you distinction in their language. They kind of got the I. They recognize as you said, they recognize the markings of it. But as children acquire more and more experience and language in these dynamic social situations, they start to get better at distinguishing what is relevant for them, I, and not necessarily what is relevant for the other person, you, and what is not necessarily immediate now and not relevant to something that affected someone at a previous time or might affect them in the future, which is then. So then being past or future, basically just not now, right?
Sure.
And so they start to be able to distinguish those different dimensions of circumstances, which is pretty sophisticated. Like to be able to wrap your head around like a thing that is not happening now that might happen or has already happened to someone other than me in a place other than here. That's a lot of being able to abstract out reality from the current circumstances and understand there are different circumstances around that.
Yeah, it requires like object permanence. It requires imaginative thinking. It requires a lot of things. Like as another example, I was thinking about this, and it's kind of like how, when we record, I don't have to listen to ads, but you do. And I don't understand that kind of experience because I don't have that experience, but you do.
Okay, so we were just describing the I versus you, here versus there, now versus then, the dyactic frames as they're called. Again, this is a frighteningly complex repertoire that sort of automatically categorizes hierarchical tiers of importance across a spectrum of valence from good to bad to something else with respect to something that's not even happening to the main observer, to the person, right?
Right.
So it's a huge interweaving, interlocking. I mean, and I just threw a lot of words in there that were all sort of, as a professor I might say 10-cent words instead of 5-cent words.
Sure.
So let's break it down a little bit so it makes more sense.
Yeah. So basically, even though, like, let's use the example of like a pet passing away, right? So even though my pet did not pass away, I can understand how the level of that emotional situation might be more important and at the top of the mind of someone whose pet did just pass away, and appreciate how that might affect their behavior and even how it might affect me differently than it affected them. So basically just saying kind of like, you had this experience. I understand that this experience was hard. I understand that my behavior will change in relation to you now that I understand that your experience probably is going to change the way that you act for a couple days or at least a few months or whatever it might be.
Yeah. And even that, like, even if I went through what you went through, I might not feel the same way you do right now. Like, it's kind of saying, I understand the circumstance is difficult for you, and I can't even know what that's like, really. And I think that level of understanding that someone else can hear, that you say, like, I can't even imagine how tough that would be for me. And so, like, I understand that this must be really tough for you, I think communicates better than trying to say something like, I know how you feel.
Right.
It's like, again, that's an elevated level of empathy there. So continuing on here, as we continue this growth and development, presumably we learn to understand even more of the complexities of this, that people may try and even go so far as to mask or hide their emotions, or alternatively, they might try and emphasize their emotions using subtleties and nuanced expression or timing in their responses in a very specific way. So I think if I maybe told someone a story and said like something that sounded unbelievable, and they look at me and they just said after a beat, really? Like,
sure.
Just the word really is not doing as much work as the timing and the tone that is used, right?
Right.
Like, it's sort of saying in a very subtle, sarcastic way, I don't believe you. That sounds ridiculous.
Yeah.
And so there is a complex way of using their language that communicates something specific to the speaker in that case, or I guess the listener, I don't know, the person who was telling the story in the first place.
Right.
Our language evolves to allow us to behave as if I here now is you there then. That is, we can act hypothetically as if we were someone else in a different situation at a different time. That's so many steps removed from where we're currently sitting. And it's kind of impressive that we can pull that off. And it also, I think, results in the ability to experience suffering that we are not experiencing.
Right. And what's actually super interesting about this is like there's so much language that's like interlocked in there too. Like so much of that is like storytelling and being able to imagine and like the private behavior around that. Like there's some really cool stuff inside of that too.
Yeah.
Now, this is arguably the entire foundational basis for empathetic expression. You can see someone you have never met on the news in another part of the world who reports on their experiences of the trauma of a major disaster, and you may actually feel sadness and even cry. And you can try to imagine what it would feel like to be that person. You have had that experience at that point in time, even though you are sitting comfortably in the safety of your own home, thousands of miles away. That is such a complex skill.
Yeah, and powerful. I mean, that can really move behavior.
Yeah.
That we can behave with respect to circumstances we're not in.
Right.
And an interesting aspect of this is I think movies and books and I mean, any kind of storytelling really lean on this heavily, right? They lean on the fact that we can appreciate that emotion in others very heavily. It's difficult to imagine that we could find as much, if any, entertainment in stories if we couldn't connect with the emotions of the characters. Right? They'd be like, oh, whatever. Who cares? Who cares what they're going through?
Right.
This doesn't seem dramatic because there's no stakes for me. I'm just sitting on the couch, like whatever. We would find very little joy, I think, in choosing to engage in stories if those stories meant nothing to us emotionally.
Well, and there's like that whole idea of like when people talk about connecting with a character, right? Like they're effectively describing that exact thing where it's like you don't emotionally relate, you don't understand, you don't like, or maybe there's nothing to understand about that character because that character is very flat and two-dimensional, right? So there's that piece, like just something that I think is really fascinating and important to like, we use colloquial language to describe this type of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, very good point.
When we have developed a robust enough cognitive capacity to expand our behavior to be able to experience the experience of others, then we approach the highest caliber we can be as a species, essentially. So because we can feel these things for others, then we help each other. We work together. We improve one another's lives. We solve our global issues, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? When we can do these things that we're talking about, when we can experience the emotions that somebody might feel and never have been in that in a practical setting, when we can do those things, that's great. And we can solve a lot of problems. When we can't, though, we devolve into things like fear, hatred, violence. We start othering people because we cannot possibly understand that experience, or we're choosing not to.
Yeah. It's hard to imagine that we would elect to fire a gun at ourselves. And suicide aside being a whole different topic that I think we'll need to address at some point. I'm desperately avoiding for the time being, but I do see as a relevant topic. But it's hard to imagine in circumstances where we're not having suicidal ideation that we would be willing to shoot a gun at ourselves or our loved ones. So if we can imagine what it's like to be the other person who's having the gun shot at them, then it becomes harder to pull that trigger. Right. And so that's the fear, hatred, and violence. That is the lack of engaging in empathetic understanding. Right. That I think makes it so that there's kind of an obvious solution here in a way, although how to execute it becomes tricky to say the least.
Yeah.
So, okay, we've talked about this. We've sort of talked about the highest echelons of calibrating our empathetic response to really knowing other people and considering who they are in the circumstances that they're in. And importantly, the extent to which we develop this repertoire, again, it is a developed repertoire. This is on a broad spectrum across people, where some people develop this very little and some people develop this in the extreme.
Yes. And those folks, the extreme empaths, are the ones that we're going to talk about. Actually, I think that's the whole reason we even started this episode, right? Was because we wanted to kind of get into extreme empaths and like what that meant.
The whole catalyst behind this discussion was talking about extreme empaths. And in doing so, it really required unpacking empathy. And that was no small task.
No.
We were able to trace a path here, though. This is where we were trying to get to. We made it.
We did some reverse engineering on this. Now, let's talk about some extreme empaths and what that means. There are several people who self-reportedly describe feeling such powerful emotional reactions to other people's powerful emotions that it can be nearly debilitating. These folks call themselves extreme empaths, highly sensitive people, or people with hyper-empathy syndrome. There's a lot of different kind of labels and terms for these folks. And it's not just them that call themselves that. Some other folks might label them that as well.
Yeah, psychology has generally recognized hyper-empathy syndrome as like a thing, although not a diagnosable condition.
Right.
But nevertheless, like this is something that's sort of, it's understood. These people who are these highly sensitive people, they tend to just be the most lovable, really. They make really great friends. They powerfully validate all of your emotions. They consider your feelings and their own behaviors. They can read even the most subtle emotional cues. They're helpful and kind and generous. They're like everything you want a good friend to be. So that is one of the benefits, if you will. And not just, I mean, I wouldn't say, just for you, but like for them, I think they like being really good friends too.
Yeah, like being helpful and being caring and kind of nurturing. Yeah, it sounds like it's like win-win for everybody, right?
Having like a rich, fulfilling relationship.
Right, exactly. Except they also report suffering a lot of the time. Hyper empathy people tend to report having a difficult time hearing people talk about their problems without feeling that those problems become their own problems. They might stew on someone else's issue for days after hearing about it. They might feel drained and exhausted by constantly taking on other people's feelings and trying to solve their problems. I mean, it can be quite a bit, it sounds like.
I found one empath's story online that I'll share some of what they're experienced. And so this self-reported hyper empath shared that she started to pick up on regional accents and idioms very quickly whenever she would visit somewhere new. I think people thought that maybe she was mocking them, or she was just being sort of quirky and weird, or like trying to fit in even though she wasn't from there. And it was really just, as she described it, she would start doing it kind of unthinkingly. She'd just be kind of imitating and mirroring how the people around her were talking and what they were saying. Also, another story she shared was that at one point she spent days and days searching for the lost pet of someone she didn't even know. When she saw their story online, I think they posted about losing their pet and trying to find them. And she was so distraught by their emotions that she took it upon herself to try and find them, even though she wasn't even friends with these people. You know, they just happened to report that was the thing that came across her feed or whatever.
Right.
And she just felt so bad for them. She felt compelled to like get out, put out search flyers and like look around to try and help. I'm very sweet, but like I can imagine the emotional toll that must take. I can't imagine, I guess I should say.
Yeah, it's got to be tough. I mean, she became a doctor to help people, which is like really wonderful, but would also have very powerful emotional reactions to unsolvable situations like some types of cancer or stages of cancer and whatnot.
Yeah, exactly. Which, I mean, yeah, I can imagine. Like you sit next to someone and you tend to react very powerfully to other people's emotions. You just told them their life is about to end, and like, that's gotta, I mean, that would be tough without being a super empathetic person.
Yeah.
Let alone someone who like really is high up there. So as far as where this come from, some psychologists believe that this develops out of early childhood trauma or some other psychological disorder that results in sort of seeking self-healing in the healing of others is the sort of the idea behind where extreme empathy could come from.
That's an interesting way to look at it. One 2018 study, so fairly, I would almost said fairly recent, but that's at this point in time 6 years old, so now I feel old. A 2018 study by Greenberg et al., Simon Baron Cohen being one of the et al., which I just learned about, looked at several self-report measures and concluded that people with extreme trauma tended to be the most empathetic, with a positive correlation between the severity of the trauma and the level of empathy, which just sounds like that has to be such a tough thing to measure on all of that.
Yeah. I mean, it required a lot of self-report, but yeah, basically they found the more traumatized the child was, the more empathetic they tended to be, really feeling other people's sort of emotions. And I can see a certain level of logic in this. Like,
sure,
I have been through some stuff, so I can appreciate how bad this is for other people. Right. Because I've been there to an extent. But that was definitely not the final word on that. And we will get to additional thoughts on that after we tease them and then leave you with some ads.
Oh, that's rough.
Okay, so there was some research that suggested that that this trauma that people experience may lead to greater empathy. Adversely, though, other studies have kind of found that adverse childhood experiences actually more predicted low empathy and alexithymia. This is a Greek word that sort of translates to no word for emotion. And this refers to people who report having trouble describing their emotions. But generally speaking, it was just low empathy. And it was sort of the people who have experienced this really rough childhood, these type of traumatic experiences, actually then were less likely to show higher levels of empathy later on.
Right. So the implied prescriptive analysis following the pro-trauma versus anti-trauma hypotheses here with respect to social emotions is a little troubling, with the former suggesting that perhaps we should traumatize children and the latter suggesting that there is no hope for traumatized children. So it's kind of this weird binary issue that's probably not really binary.
Yeah, definitely the latter group, the people who said that trauma is more likely to result in low empathy, said that early prevention and intervention is key. And I can get on board with that. That's fine. But I do find it troubling to suggest that like we should try and traumatize people because then they'll be more empathetic. And I'm like, let's just not roll the dice on that one.
Yeah. Let's not test that theory. Well, I don't know an IRB that's going to let that slide. So I think we're okay.
And to be clear, they didn't advocate for that position, but I could see someone walking away with that interpretation of the study.
Sure.
So just a thing. Now, interestingly, hyperempathy people tend to only report feeling the emotions of others when those emotions are negative. Most of the time, most of us just kind of walk around feeling neutral, right? Like we kind of have a baseline going on. A lot of us will be lucky enough to experience some moments of like extreme joy, like when watching a new Deadpool movie.
Yeah.
And
agreed.
I would imagine that hyper empathy people would pick up on this joy as well, but I just didn't find any examples or instances of this. And I was specifically trying to find it. And so the empathy seemed to kind of always be around these negative emotions instead.
Which is, I think, a kind of a fascinating thing. And maybe that's just like an error in reporting more than anything, but
it very well could be, because it doesn't make sense to me that would be like the only case.
Yeah, because I feel like if somebody's an extreme empath, they would have all of it, not half of it. Right?
Right.
So now, if they only react to emotions on the aversive side of the spectrum, then it is not empathy necessarily, which seems to imply all emotional states, but a hypersensitivity to emotions associated with pain and avoidance or maybe suffering, or like maybe kind of distressing circumstances, like they have certain reactions to those types of situations.
And there's even examples of empaths who were these like hyper empathy people who were attempting to solve the problems of others. The way that I saw it described is more that they were characterized as seeking an end to the pain, not of seeking like a positive, rewarding outcome. Not I feel good because you feel good. I feel relieved because I made this bad thing go away. It was kind of that instead. And it's not to say they couldn't feel both. It wasn't in the motivation necessarily. And it wasn't what I was seeing in the reporting of this, which again feels like it's got to be misreporting. But I just thought that was a thing to unpack. And I would definitely love it. If you are one of these highly sensitive people, please write in and share. Like, do you also get the same level of reaction around people who are experiencing joy? Is it all negative? Like, I'm just kind of curious.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I feel like I spend a lot of time in the circles that talk about self-care and healing and kind of going through those. And it's always kind of rubbed me the wrong way when people talk about healing, because healing implies that you get back to baseline and not strengthen. Almost like it's like you heal from an injury, you don't like get stronger or do like, it's like one of those types of things. So like, I don't know, maybe that's just the way that I interpret it, but like that's kind of the way that I see what you just described was like, I'm going to make sure that I'm going to do everything I can so that you feel better, but not resolve the situation so that you never feel bad again. Right?
Sure. Yeah.
I don't know. That's just a thing I was thinking about as we were kind of talking about this. But there is ultimately nothing wrong per se with being highly sensitive to others' pain and suffering and wishing to help end that for them. There's nothing wrong with that, except of course for the distress it can cause in an empathetic person. But let's be clear about our terms and conditions so that we can thoroughly appraise the situation. I think that's kind of the big takeaway with that.
Yeah. Just making sure, like, are we all on the same page about this? Like, does it mean what it says it seems to mean, or what's going on?
Right.
So those are people who are on the hyper empathy syndrome spectrum of things. There's also, of course, the opposite side.
Sure.
So, okay. On the opposite side of the spectrum from the hyper empaths are people with empathy deficit disorder. And one important note here is not being a hyper empath does not mean that you have an empathy deficit disorder. So just because you're not an extreme on one doesn't mean that you are then by default an extreme on the other. You could just be sort of in the middle somewhere where most of us are. I just want to make sure that's clear. Yeah,
sure. On the distribution, these are the tail ends, like these two things that we're talking about, like the low empathy and the high empathy. Those are like the lower ends. Yeah, we've got just most of us are pretty even keel. Now, empathy deficit disorder, as it sounds, is seemingly lacking the ability to understand and appreciate how someone else thinks and feels. They tend to be focused on only what is good for them and not how they can affect other people. or not how that specific emotion or that thought or that experience can impact other people as well.
Right. Yeah. It's just like when we're talking about how hyper empath people tend to make really good friends, empathy deficit people tend to make really terrible friends. They do nothing to help others. They consider your emotions to be, at best, irrelevant. They tend to be extremely judgmental. They do not show appreciation or gratitude, and they think only about how they can help themselves. Also called MAGAism.
Got him. I mean, yeah, if your friend's wearing a red hat, you should be concerned. They're probably not going to worry about your suffering.
Might even try and cause it.
They might even make it worse for you. And they might call you a snowflake for having a feeling about it. Now, note that this is different than sociopathy, which includes criminal behavior, and narcissism, which does not necessarily include a lack of empathy, even with an extremely focused emphasis on the importance of self. So a narcissist doesn't really have a lack of empathy. They just have more kind of a focus. They kind of like, they are turned inward and kind of focused on their own well-being more than anything.
Yeah. Self-importance.
And then sociopathy is like, scary.
Yeah. It's I get how you feel and I don't care.
Sure. Yeah. They may understand it. They can take perspective and it doesn't matter to them.
Yeah. Does not motivate behavior in one way. It's a spectrum, as we said. All right. As described before, this is developed. All of this is developed similar to low empathy and may have some association with childhood trauma or other mental disorders. It does not necessarily trauma. There can be a lot of other factors that contribute to this, but just important to note that it's never just that's just how people are. These are things that are shaped over time, often unconsciously, subtly, and without our ability to explicitly identify that it's happening when it's happening. And so we often miss that who we become and how we behave was shaped by the experiences that we have had, which includes things like how well we are able to or not able to be empathetic to others.
Absolutely. So with both and all conditions, evidence-based therapy is the best intervention to find a balance that works for the individual. Cognitive behavior therapy is often considered the gold standard, but acceptance and commitment therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy, and functional analytic psychotherapy are all emerging as approaches that may be effective for such disorders, may improve empathy outcomes, may improve perspective taking, and all those things that are kind of ensconced in all this, right?
Yeah, so if you're worried about it for yourself, there's something that can be done to help at least turn the temperature down a little bit. So it's like you might be a hyper empath, and seeking support from therapy could help turn down that just a little bit so that it's not so debilitating. Or you could be very low empath, and again, support from a psychologist, getting some therapy could help you develop that skill a little bit more.
Right? Absolutely.
Well, I found some other sort of interesting tidbits in unpacking empathy as it goes. And so there were some that I found who sort of proposed distinguishing empathy into different subcategories, if you will. You could have cognitive empathy, affective empathy, hyper empathy, or compassionate empathy.
That's interesting. I feel like that's like when people define empathy, sympathy, and compassion as three different things, right? Like having those emotions is kind of arguably different experiences.
It gets into the hair-splitting territory a little bit.
Yeah.
Maybe there's some utility there. I'm not opposed to making fine-grained distinctions if it's useful to do so. And I'm not saying that it's not here. I just don't know how it is.
Yeah. And hair-splitting, those poor rabbits. Cognitive empathy is kind of mind reading in a way, right? Not actual mind reading, but perspective taking and being able to guess at someone else's mind state with a high-ish accuracy, or at least close to 50%.
Yeah. Yeah. Sort of I think what you're probably thinking is X.
Yeah.
The affective empathy is taking on the emotions of others, feeling what they feel, at least appreciating what they feel. So it's the feeling rather than the working through the thoughts, if you will.
Right. Hyperempathy, as we described, is taking on their emotions as if they are our own and feeling what they feel, particularly negative emotions, or what we think they feel. So it's not just kind of taking on what they're actually feeling, but what we would assume they're feeling based on the circumstance and based on maybe some mannerisms the person might have.
It kind of goes back to the Kuleshov effect that we discussed in the first part, where you see someone's expression, see the context that they're in. That context then affects how you interpret their expression if it might be a little bit ambiguous.
Right.
And then finally, there was compassionate empathy. And this was described as sort of a blend between the cognitive and affective empathy, and provides motivation and strategy for helping people in emotional distress. So you can sort of appreciate and understand what someone's going through. You're sort of interpreting what they need in that moment, and you take it on. It sort of felt like in the sources I was reading for this that they suggested compassionate empathy is to be the most productive, both for the person experiencing it and the person who they're observing, if you will. So if I'm the person being compassionately empathetic, then it's both helpful for me to be that way and the person I'm being empathetic toward, as opposed to what can be somewhat counterproductive as they described from the hyper empathy angle, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I follow.
All right. Well, I think that is what we wanted to unpack in empathy, understanding the extreme ends of empathy, and I think very importantly, how empathy develops and becomes a thing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have much more on it. I don't think that it's neither a good nor a bad thing. I mean, as far as like extreme empaths go, I think having empathy is really good. Just to be clear.
Yes.
I think anything that is making you considerate of other people, I think is going to just benefit everybody like as a net gain. So I think if you are feeling like maybe you don't have a lot of empathy for folks, maybe you should work on that a little bit.
Yeah. I was taking on the experience recently where I was competing with someone in sort of a game. It wasn't like I talk about board games a lot. It was more like a ping pong game, and I remember I was taking on the experience for myself of like, I want to legitimately take on wanting this person to win and succeed. I want to feel for them all the joy they feel when they score a point. Like, I'm going to try and compete. I'm going to try and score points, but I'm also going to try and really cheer for them and feel joy for them when they're successful.
Yeah.
And it really brought a very different feeling to the game, and one that I really liked. Like, I won incidentally, but like I was like having fun the whole entire time. I wasn't frustrated when they scored. I wasn't frustrated when I missed. It was like I just was enjoying the whole entire experience, and I felt like I really just knew that person in the moment and was really appreciating the experience that we were having. And so I don't know. I guess bonus recommend, try taking something like that on, where it's like, I didn't have to. I could be very competitive if,
sure.
But I wanted to try this. I wanted to see, what does it feel like when I'm really trying to wish the best for someone who is right now my opponent. Right.
Yeah. There's something really wonderful about being intentional about that.
Yeah. Like, I was just thinking like, yeah, what if elections went that way? It feels like, I can't wrap my head around what that would be like.
No, I don't know that we've ever lived that life.
No, I'm not sure we ever will. I kind of always wondered, I was like, if someone went on stage at a debate or something and was like, I believe that my opponent has all the best intentions in the world. I believe they'll probably do the best job they possibly can when they take this on. I'm going to try and like advocate for me being that person. But I think if you went for that other person, like they'd probably do the best that they could too. And just like what a radically different experience that would would be for the people who are the constituents who are making the choice here of like feeling like we're all sort of together and not enemies.
Yeah, instead of like making comments about like how suddenly somebody thinks they're black when they've been black their whole life, like just weird divisive comments like that. I mean, that came out of nowhere. I don't think that that's any sort of like real life example, but that is one that I just thought of that I feel like people that might be relevant today.
Or throwing myself under the bus here, saying that MAGAism is people who make terrible friends because they have no thoughts for other people. I think that was not very nice of me either.
Listen, sometimes you're allowed to be not so nice. Sometimes it's okay as long as you can recognize it and move forward through it. The best way out is through.
Try and bring a level of snark and humor to our discussions.
It works. You're very effective.
I'll throw a lot of people under the bus. You might say my defining characteristic.
I think that's why we get along so well.
All right. Well, we are going to close this one out then, and we're going to recommend some things. So if you are joining us for the very first time, weird, but to come in a part two, but that's great. Happy to have you. At the end of every one of our discussions, we like to recommend some total non sequitur thing that we just think is cool. And we're going to keep doing that after I tell you about some important things, which is that if you liked what you heard today and would like to support us, go over to Patreon. If you do, you get access to early episodes, ad-free episodes, bonus content, videos, all kinds of fun stuff. A lot of it rated R, just so you know.
Sure.
Mostly for language. Actually, entirely for language.
Uh-huh.
There's no violence or really any nudity. Not much. I mean, maybe a little.
No, we don't fight anybody, and we never take off our shirts.
Yeah.
So
everyone's best interest in mind, but lots of swearing.
Yes.
Aside from that, you can also pick up some merch at our merch store. We got all kinds of goodies there. As I mentioned before, you can like this episode wherever you're listening to it, subscribe so that you never miss an episode, leave a rating so that other people are more likely to find this episode. And if you're feeling ambitious, you can even leave a nice positive 5-star review that will help other people see it and say, looks like other people are enjoying this. I should check it out too. And if you want to leave a controversial, mean, rude review, you can instead reach out to us on social media, or even better, you can email us directly at info@wwd.podcast.com. If you have nice things to say, you can also reach us on those platforms because we really like hearing that.
Well, sometimes too, we ask for folks, like if you have like mean or like non-constructive feedback, like you can email us or you can just email your own butt.
But constructive feedback we will take happily.
Yeah,
no problem.
Absolutely.
We enjoy that. And to the wonderful group of people who continue to make this happen, our list of patrons whose names I'm going to read, and I will also read your name, dear listener, if you want to join this group, includes Mike M, Megan, Mike T, Justin, Kim, Brad, Stephanie, Olivia, Brian, Ashley, Kiara, and Michelle. Thank you all so much, as always. You're the best.
You're the best. You're the most wonderful.
Also, thank you so much to my team, writing and fact-checking from Shane and myself. Our audio engineer person who makes the thing sound so good is Justin. And our social media coordinator, who you will speak with if you reach us on social media, is Emma Wilson. Thank you to my team. And, of course, thank you to you listeners. Is there anything I'm missing, Shane, or anything that you would like to add before we transition to our recommendations?
Be excellent to each other.
Word. All right, let's recommend some things.
Yeah. Recommendations.
All right, I'm going to start this one because it's kind of a silly recommendation and not for everyone.
Nope.
But it's for most people, I think. Shane and I both got to go see this movie, not together, unfortunately, someday, hopefully, but we saw it separately. And there's a brand new movie that came out at the time that we're recording this called Deadpool and Wolverine. This is the third in the Deadpool movie series, and I just loved it so much.
It was so fun.
It is so fun. It is so full of action. It is so full of comedy, gratuitous cameos, self-referencing. It was just a pure delight. So rated R. There's just so much violence and so much over-the-top use of explicit language. And if you're into that sort of thing, you will definitely enjoy yourself. And if not, this probably isn't for you. But that's my recommendation.
I back that recommendation so much because it is an absolute joy. That movie is so much fun.
Yes. Sweet. Okay.
My recommendation is this last Friday, I met with a nutritionist and I am on my way to some new health goals. And I'm really excited because there's something really freeing about taking your knowledge to the limit that is useful and then being able to enlist somebody who is more knowledgeable about something than you are to help you. And I think that's kind of what this is. It's like I have taken my nutrition and fitness to the degree that I know that I can successfully without some further support. And so I went and talked to a nutritionist about some health goals, and we are on a 6-month plan to get me down by like 30 pounds. So we'll see how this goes, and I will keep everybody posted as we move through it. Apparently I have to eat 180 grams of protein a day, which seems like a lot. So
it's so much tofu.
Oh my God, I'm going to be eating just blocks of tofu.
Just nibbling. You just pull it out of the pack. Water's dripping down your face. Just nibbling on extra firm tofu.
Yeah, I'm going to eat like corn on the cob, like a typewriter. So I'll let y'all know how it goes. He said that would be a struggle though. But either way, I'm excited about it. I think it'll be an interesting learning experience, even if it doesn't work out. Best
of luck to you for sure.
Thanks. I appreciate that.
All right, Deadpool and Wolverine, and go see a nutritionist. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Thank you for your time with us today. That is, I think, all that we have. So this is Abraham.
And this is Shane.
We're out.
See ya.
You've been listening to Why We Do What We Do. You can learn more about this and other episodes by going to www.wwdpodcast.com. Thanks for listening, and we hope you have an awesome day.